Welcome to the 2021 Leapfrog Annual Meeting. I'm Leah Binder, President and CEO of the Leapfrog Group. Thank you for joining us today, our second year in a virtual environment. Though I was so looking forward to seeing you in person this year, I'm saddened that we aren't able to do so, but we're very excited to be back on this platform and have the chance to bring you an incredible lineup of speakers and a great opportunity for conversation. To start, a few logistical notes. You're here with us on a virtual platform, an auditorium, and this is where all our sessions will take place. Please check out the other content on the platform, including peer-to-peer chat, important information from our sponsors, and links to our social media pages. You'll have a chance to ask questions after the sessions. Type your questions into the chat window and we'll answer as many as we can get to. Follow the annual meeting on social media. We'll be tweeting and posting on Facebook and LinkedIn from @Leapfrog Group handle, and also using our hashtag LFG annual meeting. I want to offer a special thank you to our gold level sponsors, Cigna and Healthtrackrx. Cigna has been part of Leapfrog's Partners Advisory Committee for over a dozen years and has provided tremendous leadership and insight to our many initiatives. I especially want to thank my colleague, Susan Crippen, who from my earliest days at Leapfrog was a great supporter of Leapfrog, but also a great advisor to me. Healthtrackrx is one of our newest partners and also the other gold sponsor of today's meeting. Healthtrackrx is a PCR lab focused on solutions for employers and providers. We're tremendously grateful to both companies for their strong support of Leapfrog's mission. We have other sponsors as well who have been generous to Leapfrog and are also very strong supporters of our mission. They make this meeting and so much else possible at Leapfrog. Please join me in thanking our silver sponsor, Gojo, our bronze sponsors, Allscripts and Viacom CBS, and our Leapfrog champions, AARP, BioVigil, Ecolab, HealthNet, Horizon, Medline, Merck, and Rensair. Now, it is my privilege to introduce David Goldhill, board chair of Leapfrog since 2018. David is best-selling author of the book, Catastrophic Care, Why Everything We Think We Know About Healthcare is Wrong. David is also founder and CEO of Sesame. David?
Thanks, Leah. On behalf of Leapfrog's board of directors, I'm pleased to welcome you to our 2021 annual meeting. The theme for today's meeting is Excellence for Everyone, the path forward for patient care. High-quality healthcare fails if some are left behind. To succeed, we need to expect excellence for everyone. We hope today's meeting can help propel us on a path forward where no one is left behind. We ask you this year, as we do every year, to please be candid and open-minded. That ability to handle true transparency is the hallmark of Leapfrog's success, and you're a part of that success by joining us today. I want to add my special thanks to our gold sponsors, Cigna and Healthtrackrx. Today's sponsor for the opening keynote by Leah Binder, our president and CEO, is Gojo, the premier vendor of hand hygiene solutions, including a product we've all come to know quite well, Purell. Thank you, Gojo, for your support in making today's event happen and in the active role you play on Leapfrog's Partners Advisory Committee. And with that, I'll pass it back to Leah.
Thank you, David. Black patients are more likely than white patients to be hurt by preventable errors and injuries at hospitals. That's according to a recent study from the Urban Institute. The study's author, Anuj Gangopadiye, looked at a fairly small subset of the many things that can go wrong in patient care, such as kidney injury requiring dialysis, sepsis, pressure ulcers, pulmonary embolism, and a number of surgery-related adverse events. These events are almost always preventable, He described the differences he found between Black and white patients as clinically large. That's strong words from a researcher. For instance, Genko Padilla found that Black patients were 27% more likely to get stage 3 or 4 pressure ulcers. These are never events, excruciating and sometimes deadly bed sores so deep they expose muscle or bone. I know this well. My grandmother died from this, and it was not right. That is not the way to go. It should never happen. So how do we account for the disparities between Black and white patients that Genko Padilla found? Well, there's 3 explanations that are commonly offered when there's a study that finds disparities like this. And all of these explanations have some element of truth, but none of them fully account for what Genko Padilla found. First, one explanation is that Black people get worse care because they tend to use worse hospitals. There are some studies suggesting that hospitals serving predominantly Black patient populations get worse outcomes than hospitals serving predominantly white populations. We find this is not always true when we look at Leapfrog data, but some researchers have looked at other evidence and they make a credible case. But Genko Padilla found disparities within hospitals among patients in the same age group of the same gender. So the disparities in adverse events could not be explained only by differences among hospitals. A second explanation for disparities when they're observed in the study comes from discussions of social determinants of health, such as poverty, shortages of community supports, diminished access to nutritious food, and reduced educational opportunity, among others. Research supports that these social determinants of health are among the root causes of observed health disparities. We'll hear more about that in today's discussions at today's meeting. We have some world experts in this topic here with us. A good body of literature suggests that 70 to 80% of an individual's health status is tied to these factors, making them more predictive of your health status than doctors or hospitals. Still though, this particular study controlled for socioeconomic status, among other factors, and still found Black patients experienced more preventable harm. Of course, no study can control for all social determinants of health, but clearly they were not the sole reason for disparities observed between Black and white patients in this study. The third explanation you hear frequently is that the study itself looks at too small a population. And most studies on disparities do have small populations because it's very difficult to get this data. For anyone from a hospital in this room right now, you know how difficult this data is to acquire. So sometimes the studies are small, but not this study. This study is a large sample, probably the largest sample of any study on disparities. It's data across 26 states, hundreds of hospitals, and millions of patient claims using long-standing measures vetted and tested by leading researchers and provided by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, also known as AHRQ, one of our favorite agencies. So let's recap. The Urban Institute study found Black patients more likely to endure serious preventable harm than white patients, controlling for socioeconomic status and gender, with those disparities between Black and white patients observed even when patients were in the same hospital. The sample size is large enough to be significant. So what is going on? What is the explanation? Believe it or not, in all the commentary about this study, I rarely saw anyone name the elephant in this living room. Could there be bias in the treatment of Black patients? Now, over the past few years, we have seen more vitriol in our public discourse than ever before, and I am not going to contribute to that today by pointing fingers. The vast majority of people who work in hospitals don't want to be biased against anyone. They don't want anyone to get a preventable harm. They care deeply about their patients. It's their life's work. Still, though, how can we address harmful bias when we see it? How can we address it when people are being hurt by it right now, even as we gather together today? Well, first, let's acknowledge bias in general is human, and all of us have it. And it's not always bad. In fact, sometimes it's good. It's a survival mechanism. I think of bias as that instinctual ability to quickly categorize people and objects in our head. We can instantly tell the difference between a leopard and a kitten, even if you're not a nature lover, and that's a good thing because you need to know which one to pet. But when we use the bias instinct that we have against people, then we have a major problem. When my son Casey was 7, I got stung by that problem. My husband and I adopted Casey. His birth parents are Hispanic. Casey's skin is a beautiful brown. At a weekend science fair, Casey made a beeline for one display, a Rube Goldberg contraption created by 2 college engineering students who were behind the booth. Casey stood at the front of their exhibit while 6 other kids, all white, crowded behind him. The student exhibitors, those engineering students, began engaging with the kids and talking about their invention. Only they didn't engage Casey. The student exhibitors ignored Casey's questions, even as they answered question after question from kids standing behind him. They didn't give Casey any of the toy trinkets they handed out. They didn't look Casey in the eye. It was like Casey was invisible. Yet he was standing at the very front of the crowd. My child was quite literally overlooked as the student exhibitors peered over his head to engage the white kids. I cannot tell you how outrageous this was. It was extremely painful to watch. I made my way through the crowd to get to the exhibitors. "Pay attention to my child, please," I said, as nicely as I could, pointing out that they'd been ignoring him. They looked at me blankly with kind of eyebrows raised. They had no idea they'd been treating my child this way, and they figured I was the one with the problem. It's been 7 years since this happened, but my blood still boils. I don't think those engineering students meant to hurt us. They were there to have a good time with kids. They had good intentions. They were volunteering. They were teaching. But wow, this really hurt. And the bias was clear as day. Even if they didn't see it, it was clear. So I worked the next day. I recounted this story with a colleague I trust, Angela Hopkins. Many of you know Angela. Angela is our office administrator who's been with us for 11 years. And among other things, is the wizard who runs logistics for this annual meeting every single year. She is an African-American mother of kids about the same age as Casey. So here's how Angela responded when I told her this story. "Welcome to my world." I asked her about that world. She gave me an example. A traffic dispute where a white woman called her an N-word. Angela's misunderstanding me, I thought. What happened to Casey wasn't like that. Nobody aimed a racist slur at my child. That would be real racism. They just ignored my kid. But it suddenly dawned on me, especially for Black or brown people, being ignored and being insulted are different in form, but identical in function. They hurt. So last summer, the ABIM Foundation invited me to a retreat where they gather physicians and non-clinicians like me and ask what physicians could do to build trust with the public, and particularly build trust with populations often subject to disparities. They asked for blog submissions for their website. And to write my blog, I asked Angela what advice she had for them. Angela said that her ability to trust a physician means they look her in the eye, respect her time, return her calls. Lapses in these small things feel disdainful when you're used to disdain. You can find my blog about Angela on the ABIM Foundation website to hear more about that, but it was striking to me that it was even the smallest of things can have huge impact. I really admire the foundation's leadership in candidly addressing these tough issues and wrestling with tough questions, and most of all for listening to patients. They are the same organization that led the enormously influential Choosing Wisely campaign, which is still ongoing. This is the kind of leadership we need in healthcare, and Leapfrog is emulating that with our work on disparities. So I'd love to think I'm free of the bias that so enraged me when it was directed at my kid, but ever so gently, Angela reminded me of the time I excluded her from meetings on a project she was involved in. I thought it was a small oversight, not in any way racially motivated, yet I overlooked her in the same way those college students overlooked my son. Suddenly, I feel the sting she must have felt. To build an equitable and high-quality delivery system, we must all feel the sting. We must look each other in the eye. We must look ourselves in the eye in the mirror, and we must change. Is it possible to change? Now, here's why I think it's possible. Think about the last movie you saw or a book you read with a great twist. My favorite twist was a film called The Sixth Sense. And don't worry, no spoilers here. Even though I knew going into the film, there was a big twist to come. Everybody was talking about the big twist in The Sixth Sense. I still didn't figure it out. I was totally fooled. Even at the end, the twist was so shocking, I didn't really believe it. Basically, I assumed one thing at the beginning of the movie and missed that the truth was another thing altogether. I love the movie so much, I saw it again. Of course, the second time, the twist didn't fool me. On the contrary, knowing the twist, I suddenly noticed all the obvious signs of the truth that I missed in the first go-around. My own bias led me astray that first time, but I learned, and I changed that bias, and here's the kicker. I loved it. Most of us love being fooled by a twist. There's something fulfilling and exciting about flipping our assumptions upside down. So yes, we can change. And yes, we can even find fulfillment from it. And most of all, we must change because it's the right thing to do. And it's time. In 2021, Leapfrog added to our survey a standard that hospitals and ASCs monitor their data on quality by race, ethnicity, language, and other patient characteristics. We're still working on this, finding out what health systems are doing, how they do it, and looking for best practices to confront disparities in outcomes when they're found, to turn ourselves upside down until we find the truth. Health equity is part of the patient safety journey for Leapfrog and for all of us in this virtual room. Not separate from it, the same journey. Patient safety fails when some patients don't benefit. And health equity doesn't mean equally unsafe care for everyone. We mean excellent, safe care for everyone equally. That's what Leapfrog set out to do 21 years ago. For many of the preventable harms we see every day, the problem is that the patient was ignored or in some way, reminiscent of my son again at that science fair. Falls happen when patients don't want to wait any longer for the nurse to answer the call for help. Pressure ulcers happen when clinicians aren't paying attention. Infections can happen when people neglect to wash their hands. Especially with the pandemic and in light of the extreme workforce challenges health systems are experiencing, we see more opportunity to overlook patients. Restrictions on visitors means Families are often not present to pay attention either. This is a recipe for major harm for all patients, but especially for people who are historically more likely to be ignored or neglected. We have to work harder and smarter to reverse course and save lives. So, Leapfrog's full speed ahead on patient safety in America. We can and will do better for every patient every time. We'll need your courage and your candor. We will acknowledge our own bias together, and we will change together. So today, at our virtual meeting, we won't point fingers, but we will look each other in the eye and tell the truth. That's what allows Leapfrog to succeed in our critical mission for the patients of this country. Thank you. So now we have a little bit of time for questions. Again, if you have a question you wish to ask me, please type it into the chat box, and we'll see it on your, you'll see that next to your video screen. So I'm open to questions. All right, looks like I have a question. How did you land on the theme for the annual meeting? Why was it important for Leapfrog to weigh into this? Well, actually it was 21 years ago that there was To Err as Human came out from the National Academy of Medicine. Actually, it was called the Institute of Medicine then. That was a document that founded Leapfrog. A number of the folks who were involved in that, who were instrumental in making sure that it got the attention it deserved, were also people who wanted to form Leapfrog. They felt, these, particularly purchasers and employers who were part of that effort, felt that it was very important for us to have an open market for healthcare. They felt like there should be transparency and people should be able to choose among providers when they were making the all-important decision in their life about where to seek hospital care. We began with hospitals. Now, of course, we also rate ambulatory surgery centers, but at the time it was just hospitals, and it was a pretty daring venture to try and do it, because at the time the internet wasn't quite as ubiquitous. It was, people would say, well, you know, you can't really rate hospitals. It's not really, nobody's going to pay attention even if you could. It's not going to be fair. You can't risk adjust it. Of course, since then we've had quite a number of great advances in science and literature. We've had the National Quality Forum that has come forward to help us be able to do it. But back then it was much harder. We still did it, and here we are. And we have seen progress, and we have made progress. But one of the little things that was forgotten in the Institute of Medicine report, and I think our next panel is really going to reinforce that as well, is the fact that it also called for health equity. It also talked about how you can't have patient safety if it's not safety for everyone. That's not safety. If we're going to achieve patient safety, it doesn't mean we say, well, this population gets really safe healthcare now, but the others, well, not so much. That's not what we mean. Patient safety is about everyone. And in a similar vein, we don't want bad care equally for everyone. So we don't mean, when we say health equity, we don't mean equity of bad care. So we need to really be looking closely at how far have we come in preserving equity for everyone as part of our fundamental mission around patient safety. So one of the things that our board has talked extensively about, certainly many of our employer members have talked extensively about as well, and have really come to the table to say it's time, is what can Leapfrog do to expand this effort around health equity? As I talked about just now, and also from just the thousands of studies at this point, we do know that we aren't where we should be with health equity. So we must do better. We must improve it. So from that vein, it was time, Leapfrog felt, and we feel strongly, it was time for us to talk about how equity fits into this broader mission of patient safety, and vice versa, how patient safety fits into this broader mission of health equity. Both fit together, both are inextricably linked. And so this was our moment to be able to make that case, to describe what that means, and to talk about what's next. Okay, so let's see, another question. Is equity something Leapfrog would incorporate into its ratings on patient safety? That's our plan. We can't do it right away. We can't do it in part because we don't have the data. And also, as I think we'll see as we talk in our next panel, there are some major challenges to getting really good data that we can use effectively in the mission for improving the quality and safety of care for all Americans. There's some real challenges in getting that data, and part of the challenge is it's not readily available now. Part of the challenge is collecting it, is what are the best methods for asking people about their race, ethnicity, and language in sensitive situations? Can we ask them, or how else can we attain that data, and in a way that's effective and useful and promotes equity? So part of the problem is that we don't have all the data we need. And then part of the problem as well is that I think health systems are really only now embarking on a really aggressive journey around health equity and really seeing it as part of their own quality improvement projects. So we want to push that along. This year, in 2021, we introduced on the survey some fact-finding questions about health equity, whether hospitals are stratifying their quality data on race, ethnicity, and language, as well as other factors such as LGBTQ status, et cetera, and what they're doing with that information. At the same time as we asked that on the survey, not scored or publicly reported, just a question to really find out what's happening with health systems. Even as we asked that question, we also started to do real interviews and identify some of the high performers in the country and have been in intensive discussions with them to really understand what they are doing to address these inequities when they see them. I'll give you just one example that I think is really compelling, which was Kaiser Permanente, which implemented an approach around hypertension. They had found that African-American patients were not treated as aggressively for hypertension. And so they implemented a broad range of practice protocols and educational protocols that resulted in major improvement in their equity profile around treatment of hypertension, something that we think is really exciting and demonstrates that you can make a real difference at the delivery of care, in the delivery of care in an equitable way. I say that because we don't have to wait to change all of the social determinants of health to do that. Much as we do need to work on social determinants of health, we don't have to wait for that in order for everyone who's watching this meeting right now to be able to make a difference. So Kaiser was, I think, very inspirational in that way. And we've talked to a number of health systems as well that have been inspirational. So more to come as we learn from what's happening, as we learn from best practices. Those we will ultimately incorporate into ratings of safety by Leapfrog. So I have another question. What is the role of employers in advancing this work in reducing disparities in healthcare and health outcomes? Employers have really been very assertive in coming to Leapfrog to ask us to incorporate health equity and best practices into our ratings. They were the first to come to the table on this, in part because many employers, most employers actually, have a diverse workforce, and they want to make sure that their investment in healthcare is helping all of their employees and their families equally, that they aren't interested in hearing about the fact that some of their employees are left behind. So they have been really interested in understanding where these disparities come from. That was actually heightened through COVID. As we know, there were very significant disparities in the likelihood that certain populations of Americans died from COVID or were hospitalized from COVID. For instance, African Americans were twice as likely to die from COVID. So those were issues that really got the attention of many employers. And so they're really wanting to understand how hospitals are addressing these very significant issues and how they can be helpful in alerting their employees to places that seem to have lower rates of disparities and better safety, and as well what they can do in terms of their payment and contracting incentives and other ways of that they can contribute to making sure that their employees are getting equity in their care. Okay. Does the Leapfrog Group survey include questions about equity for LGBTQ patients? How does that fit into the picture? We do ask if LGBTQ is included in the efforts hospitals are making to stratify their quality data to understand how it's working. Again, those were fact-finding questions. We're not scoring or publicly reporting them now, though for next year's survey, we have done some work on them with our experts to make the questions as clear as possible so people understand what exactly we mean. But what we mean is any disparity where we've seen an impact of bias in a negative way on people's health, we are asking hospitals to detect that problem in their own system and then address it. So LGBTQ status is one where there's clearly been evidence in the literature of bias that has been harmful to people. It's also an area where the collection of the data has been notably difficult. There are many individuals who are patients who may not be interested in disclosing this information about themselves. But there are best practices, and there are best practices for treating people who need care, who may face particular obstacles and particular biases normally in their lives that make it very difficult for them to seek out or be as candid as they should be or want to be with their providers. So we are really interested in looking at what are our best practices in this area and how can we foster those as well. This is a major area of concern and a significant area of disparity. What does the future of equity and bias look like in the next five years or 10 years? Let's be optimistic, and I think our next panel as well may agree with me. I hope they will agree with me on this piece of optimism. We will do better. I think we've become much more aware of the problems of inequity and the impact of bias on people's families, like on my very own family, as I described. I think we've become much more aware of that through our pandemic years, in part because of the pandemic itself, where we have seen such disparities in the health of people in our population, but also because we've been aware of it through the racial reckoning that we've seen with the George Floyd killing and some of the protesting that happened last year, to some of the heightened awareness we've had around how people are treated differently based on their race, ethnicity, language, and other factors. So my hope is that as we emerge from the pandemic and we reset so much of our nation's values and goals going forward, this is going to be a major one of those. I've been really heartened to see how many health systems have been addressing this issue in really serious ways and powerful ways, looking quite candidly at their own selves, looking in the mirror to say, does our leadership team, for instance, represent the community we serve? Those are hard questions, and they are asking them, as is so many businesses and employers that are involved with Leapfrog. So I do think that we will see change. And I think that the idea that bias is going to survive in the long run in our healthcare system, I think is highly unlikely, especially with the use of big data and the increasing sophistication of our systems to detect problems in quality and safety. I think that bias will not survive that well. Bias is a human issue, as I described earlier too. I mean, we're human beings, there's always going to be some bias. But it's not going to be bias that harms people, or if it is harming people, we're going to detect it faster and we're going to address it quicker. We have many more systems in place. We have much more many more evidence-based practices that we know exist to address them. And we have a lot of passion, willingness, and excitement to actually see change. So I do have to take the optimistic route that we will use the tools that we have in 2021 and beyond to make a real difference in this problem. But first, and the first and foremost thing is we have to look candidly at this problem. All right, I'm afraid, I think we're going to be mostly out of time unless we have any more questions. We have just a few more seconds. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to get our next agenda item started. Thank you all again. And I do hope that all of you are able to take a look at your own contributions to solving this really critical problem, because we all have a role to play. Thanks.